Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today for our webinar on moving to France and buying a French property. My name is Karen Tate. I shall be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist. For the past 20 or so years, I've been editing French property news magazine, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. Thank you to all of you who've already sent in your questions. We shall get to those shortly. There's also a box to the right of your screen if you have any questions during the webinar. Firstly, I'll just hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Joanna, do you want to start?
Hello, yes, and bonjour everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight. I'm Joanna Leggett, so I'm part of the Leggett family. I'm one of the directors of Leggett Immobilier. We're a French company, French-based. We all live and work in France. We started off in a tiny little office in the Dordogne, and now we cover the whole country. So we're able to help you with any areas, and we have all of our agents, all bilingual, that live and work in their areas. So hopefully we'll be able to help you find your dream home.
Thanks, Joanna. And Tracy?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert. I've been living and working in France for the past 35 years, and I have been through all of the relocation processes in all of these years. As you can imagine, when I first came to France 35 years ago, the UK was not part of the EU, so I started where many of you are today. So it's our job at LBS to help you move, live, or create a business in France, and I'm looking forward to answering all your questions this evening.
Thanks, Tracy. And Sharon?
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a French mortgage broker at CAFP International. I've been arranging French mortgages for non-resident and expat clients for the last 23 years. So I'm looking forward to answering your questions this evening and very happy to help if you have any other questions.
Thanks, Sharon. Paulette?
Hi everybody, my name's Paulette Booth. I'm the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International, which is a dedicated English-speaking agency based in France. I'm also the director of L'Onomie, which is a visa health insurance specialist company, which is the broker side of our agency. So I can help you with insurance from A to Z.
Thanks, Paulette. And Amanda?
Hi everybody, my name is Amanda Johnson. I am a partner at the Spectrum IFA Group, and we are a European company. I'm based in France, I'm in the Loire Valley, and we are fully regulated here in France, and I can help you with investments, pensions, tax questions, all of that. That's what I specialise in, and I'm ready and waiting for your questions.
Thanks, Amanda. And Harry?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So my name is Harry Burtis, and I'm joining you tonight to represent Lumon. I've been working for Lumon for 3 years now, based in London, but originally I'm from France, so I grew up down in the south, so I do know a little bit about what it's like to be a foreigner in France. Lumon, who are we? Well, we're here to provide a faster, more secure and cost-effective solution for international transfers relating to property transactions. We've been helping clients move to and from France for 25 years, and we've transacted over 7 billion, I think it was, pounds worth of currency last year. Personally, I am a bit of a Francophile. I love the country, the language, the food, everything about it. But I'm also interested in the FX markets and how the rates changing based on events happening in the world. So one thing I do like to do in these webinars is to find out a little bit more about you. So I'm going to share a poll which should appear on your screen now. Hopefully that's come through. And this is a first question just relating to when you're planning to actually start looking at properties in France. It's really helpful for us to understand, as you might be aware, that buying a process in France is not an overnight process. So it can take sometimes about 3 months. But the good news is that we can use this time to plan the transfer and offer you a wide array of options to choose from. Timing and planning are the two key things when gearing up to make a large international payment. So it is a really important piece of information. So thanks to everyone who's answered that. I'm just now going to close that question and share another one, which relates to when you might financially be in a position to make an offer. It's another important piece of information, especially if you're going to be looking at it from a foreign currency exchange point of view, because we're concerned with this due to the fact that rates are moving every second, every day. And we can assist you by protecting, you can decide to protect yourself by locking in rates early, for example, by targeting a particular level to ensure that you're getting the most out of your transfer. These are all points that you can bring up with a trader when you're speaking to us on the phone once you've registered. So thank you, everyone. And now, final question from me tonight. It's just to find out a little bit more about where you're joining us from today. It doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the actual buying process in France, but there can be slight nuances when it comes to making sure that you're all geared up from a transfer point of view, making sure that we understand exactly what we need to look out for, and making sure everything goes smoothly. So thanks to everyone who's answered those questions. It was really useful, and I'm going to pass back to Karen now.
Thanks, Harry. So, yep, let's get started on the questions. A couple of property ones for Joanna first. Agnes V in Europe and Laurie Milbrandt in America both ask, how long does it usually take to buy a property in France? And Laurie also asks, do you have to be a resident? Oh, I think you're still muted.
There we go. No, you don't have to be a resident, as most of our sort of European or outside of Europe clients are buying a property either as a holiday home or to move to France. So no, you don't have to be a resident. You need to obviously have a look at the properties, come over, do some recce trips, get to know your area. Before, I always suggest, because France is so huge and location is so important, that you make sure that you've got all the amenities that you need. If you need to be like half an hour from a hospital, or you don't want to be too hot or too cold, you know, to do as much research as you can. Once you find the property and you put the offer in, we draw up what's called the compromis de vente, which is like in the UK, it's an exchange of contracts. And we have to do 5 diagnostic tests for the vendor's property, which the vendor pays for. That's things like lead, electrics, the septic tank, termites, all of those sort of tests. Once they're done, then we can sign that contract. So sometimes that can be done, if we already have the paperwork, within a week of you putting the offer in. If that's the case, you would sign first as the buyer, and then the vendor signs. Once the vendor signed, he can't pull out of the contract, so he's tied in. So it's very, you can't really get gazumped like you can in other countries where you could complete an exchange on the same day. But you still have a 10-day cooling off period. So you put in your offer, you have 10 days and it's signed, and then you have 10 days cooling off. And after that 10 days cooling off period, you put in your 10% deposit to the notaire, and the notaire holds that until completion. Completion depends on whether there's any suspensive clauses, because you could put in clauses like we want to get a mortgage, or we want to have change of use, change the barn into accommodation, or we want a swimming pool, or something like that. And once all of those clauses are met, then it just carries on, and it usually takes probably in total about 3 or 4 months until completion. If any of those clauses aren't met, for example, if you were refused permission to have a swimming pool, or refused permission for change of use, etc., then you can withdraw from the sale and have the deposit returned to you. But you can't, after the 10-day cooling off period, you can't pull out for any reason, or you would risk losing your deposit. So it's very, very protected. As a buyer, you're extremely protected, and the whole process can realistically take about 3 months. Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Taking it in turns to be muted. Thanks, Joanna. I've got a question now for Tracy. Alison Walker says, I work in the UK, but I have a home in France. I'd like to work remotely from France. What visa and tax registration will I need?
Okay, so a really good question. And okay, so you already established your home in France, so that's a good thing. But if you are thinking of coming to France and working from France independently, so your clients can be worldwide. They may still be back in the UK, they could be anywhere else. You need to have a business visa, of course. For most people who want to work independently, so they have a skill set that they can transfer to France, one of the main visas that people like to go for, the one that I recommend the most, would be what's called a liberal visa or an entrepreneur visa. There's lots of different words for this, so it does get confusing. So it really is a freelance type visa. So that's the type of visa you would need. The process, of course, is from the UK, and it takes at least 4 months. So I think it's very important when you're talking about business visas. This is the one visa I'm looking at now, but you're talking about a 4 months process to be able to get that business visa, because you have to get a work authorization, or avis de projet as it's called, to be able to have your visa appointment. So that's the first thing. Then obviously when you go through the visa process for the liberal visa, one of the key things you have to prove is that your business is viable economically. So there's a business and financial plan that you have to put together. It's a very coherent business and financial plan. That's where a lot of people go wrong, because when we think about a business and financial plan, we're often thinking about, you know, a 35-page document that you're going to show to the bank to get money, to get investment. But no, this is really about the visa office. So it's a coherent plan about what you will do it, how you will do it, and what finances you have. That is what we use to get the work authorization, and then you can go for your visa appointment. Once you come into France with that visa, and again, it's about a minimum 4-month process, and it can be slightly longer depending how quick you want to go through from a business perspective. Once you come into France, there's a validation process, and for a business visa, the validation process is really important because it triggers the immigration, and behind the scenes, you get pulled in for a language test, written and oral. Now, before anybody panics who's watching this video, whether it's now or on the replay, this is oral and written test. Is not to kick you out of the country. You're in the country with your visa. It's to establish what level you have, so that you may need to get French lessons. And really the idea is by the time you get to your renewal, you will have the right language level to be able to get through your renewal, get a multi-annual visa. So the visa process itself, once you're in France, is very important. And I think you asked about tax and business. It really will depend. The business structure, for example, will depend on what type of activity and how much you're earning as to which business structure you want to go into and what tax you will pay. Of course, that's it's a question that is so large, and of course we've got Amanda on the call tonight, so from a tax perspective she might want to look at that. But certainly from a business structure perspective, when we set up our clients with a small business activity, it really depends on what your earnings are looking like and what your costs are looking like. So we look at the P&L, see what you're earning, what the cost structure is, and then would say, okay, this is the type of business structure you want. So obviously I could go on for hours about this subject, and I do consultations which do take an hour just on a business project. So hopefully that's giving you an overview, but do reach out if I can help you with that.
Thanks, Tracy. And obviously there isn't a sort of one size fits all visa and tax registration process. It is important to make sure that you get the correct one for you and seek specialist advice on that. Okay, then we've got a question now for Amanda. Francesca Wade says, what are the differences in tax on rental income from a holiday home for a foreign owner as compared to a French citizen?
Okay, so firstly, we need to establish whether you as a non-French person are resident here in France or not. Okay, so if you're like myself and everyone else on here, and you're a non-French person, you are taxed exactly the same as a French citizen. Okay, so there's no difference on that, but that's only if you are resident here. Okay. If it is a rental for holiday home and you don't live here all the time, so let's say that you have this rental and you live in the UK, then what happens is there's a flat, you have to declare your tax here because you've earned the earnings here. And there is a flat tax rate of 20% up to around about, I think it's €29,500. If it's more than that, then the rate goes up. Okay, but if you're resident here, then it's worked out on what your household income is. So it's slightly different. Now, if you are non-resident and you're living in the UK or America or wherever you are, and your tax rate is below 20%, then you can contact the tax office and prove that you pay less tax, and there's things that they can do. But there is a really, if you have a look at the government website here, which is impo.gov.fr, you will be able to find what all the rates are and what all the limits and things are. So it's a really useful website, and you can, if you're on a modern day computer, it will translate it for you as well.
That's a good tip on the end. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it like that. Of course, you can just translate it all. So, question for Paulette now. Colin Nuttall in the UK says he'd like more insight concerning health insurance. So perhaps you could explain a little about how healthcare works in France.
Yeah, okay, so health insurance, how the system works in France, I could probably spend a day explaining it, but I'll try and keep it to, you know, a minute or 2 minutes. Basically, the main thing, especially for clients coming from the UK, is obviously the NHS in the UK. You know, you go to the doctor, you go to the hospital, whatever. As long as it's public hospital, you don't pay anything. That's not the case in France. So most treatment in France isn't free at point of service. So generally, I went to see my GP last night. I wrote a check. France still likes checks, and so I wrote a check for €30, but within probably a week I'll have that money back. So I'll get 70% back from the social security system, like the NHS, and then the rest will come from my mutual top-up. Now, the health insurance policy is called a mutual top-up because it tops up the refund that you get from the state. So you've got to get the refund from the state first, but then the mutual top up to, depending on what level you've taken, to basically cover to top it up. There's lots and lots of different levels. We can probably do, I think it's about 64 different combinations of cover. There's extra add-ons for optical and dental. There's cover for hearing aids, for you know, different things if you want to increase hospital stay. So say, for example, on a hospital stay, you want to have enough that it will cover for a private room. So different levels of refunds. Generally, if you're going to go and see just a routine GP, like something that's what's called 100% would cover you. But if you start going to see more of a specialist, so you want to see the best heart surgeon in the country, you'd need a better mutual top-up because they can charge above kind of the standard rate. I say it's really quite complicated to explain, but the main thing to remember is once you're in the system and you've got everything registered and you've got your health insurance policy set up, it's just kind of all automatic. Usually, say for example with a blood test, you may not even have to pay anything up front. It's just all claimed directly through the social security and your mutual, so you don't have to pay anything up front. So it sounds complicated, but actually it's not, and it's quite a well-oiled machine. Once you're in the system, it just works, and it's quite easy, and probably, can I go as far as saying probably 50% more better than the NHS?
Well, it's definitely true that France has a very good state healthcare system. Most people who move to France will comment on that and say how quickly they're seen by doctors and specialists.
Depends where you live, but in general, it's pretty spot on.
Yeah, and as you explaining, not totally free, but with those mutual top-up insurance policies, you're covered, which certainly our friends from America will be glad to hear.
Yeah.
So a question for Sharon now. Can UK residents apply for French mortgages? If so, what do we need to provide in terms of documentation and so on? And is it different to what French nationals have to provide?
Excuse me, I have a bit of a cough, so I do apologise if I cough. Yes, UK residents can apply for a French mortgage. It's a little bit more complicated since Brexit. It's the case for a lot of things, but basically it means there are less lenders on the market willing to lend to UK residents because of the rules which they have to respect in terms of how they deal with foreign customers, i.e. people living in the UK. So they have a little bit more restrictions. However, there are lenders that are willing to lend to people from the UK without them having to be what we classify as a high net worth individual. If you are a high net worth individual, we can give you that classification, then there are a few more lenders that are able to help. But there's a good 4 or 5 lenders active in the market. After Brexit, it really closed down and it was very difficult to get a French mortgage for a UK resident, but it's possible again now. In terms of deposit, you'd be looking between 20 and 30% as a foreigner in the UK or a UK citizen in the UK. If you were a French national, that deposit would come down to 10%. And people living in France, as opposed to as in French fiscal residents, regardless of nationality, can generally get 90, 100% mortgages, but that's if you're fiscally resident in France. So if you moved to France, got your visa, had your company set up and wanted to apply 3 years later, or you had employment, you would then be applying as a French fiscal resident. So you would need to have less deposit, and the fact that you were British wouldn't, or an ex-UK resident wouldn't really matter. In terms of documentation, we don't have credit reports in France, and the banks have a legal responsibility to lend and respect the French lending criteria, which is actually set by the French government through the HCSF. So the banks have to do all of their due diligence, but because we don't have a credit report, they have to actually ask you for the documentation in order to be able to do that. So expect to provide basically everything about your financial history, last 3 months pay slips, last 3 years tax returns or P60s, last 3 years company accounts if you run your own business, proof of your mortgage offer or your loan contracts for all existing loans and mortgages, with an updated statement showing how much you have outstanding, your last 3 months bank statements, your savings and investments, proof of all of this, proof of ownership of your property, your credit card, marriage certificate, ID, utility bill, all of the normal sort of know your customer documents from a banking level. But it's complicated, it sounds complicated, but as a broker, we actually help you through that process to make it more understandable and more achievable, to package your application to avoid going backwards and forwards forever with the bank asking you for more and more and more documents. So it is quite a heavy process, but it's perfectly achievable for people from the UK. I think that should answer the question.
Thanks, Sharon. So if people are looking to apply for a mortgage, it's not a bad idea to start putting together a file of all your documents, relevant documents early on. And if you're moving to France, you will need a lot of those documents for a lot of processes anyway. So being well organised with your paperwork is good advice. Right, okay. Harry, a question for you now. Claire Storer in the UK says she'd like to know more about currency exchange and the necessity for a French bank account. I mean, I think in the long term, you need, if you're moving to France, you need, or you have a French property, you need a French bank account, but do you need one from the start? What should you know about currency?
So with bank accounts, for the actual buying the property for the purchase, the short answer is no, you don't need a bank account to buy a property in France. If you're wondering why, well, to purchase the property, ultimately the funds are going to be, you're going to need the funds to be sent to the notaire's bank account. So when they're sent to this notaire's bank account, they don't need to originate from a French bank account. You've got a couple of options. The first option, which is the traditional way, is you can go into your bank and request an international transfer, and they'll give you a fee and say, yep, okay, it's sent across to your desired bank account. The only thing is, in terms of currency exchange, this might not be the best option for you. This is because typically banks, high street banks, don't offer very competitive rates of exchange. And it could be costing you quite a lot more than the fee that they're displaying for a simple international transfer. It's really within that exchange rate where we could be providing you with a saving. So if you were to do it through a company like us, we would be giving you access to Euro sort of e-wallet, we call it. It's a virtual wallet. You can log into it at any time. You can manage your beneficiaries and make your payments to wherever you need your money to be going. When sending to a notaire's bank account, we'll actually be using our local bank in France. This is to make the process as easy as possible, because notaires have got to do more checks, more paperwork when they're receiving the money from an international bank account. So over the years, we've learned that this is the best way to keep it simple. But then, you know, once you've bought your property, you get there, you start getting settled, then if I was you, I would open a French bank account, and you can start using that you can use the money that's in your Lumon e-wallet to credit your French bank account. And actually, many of our clients decide to keep using Lumon to transfer between both countries. So when they need to top up their Euro account in France, they go through us just to save some more money. And yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Harry. That all sounds pretty straightforward. Very interesting to know about the wallet. Sounds like it makes things simpler. So a question for Joanna now. Jeanette Hamill in the UK wants to know, if we buy an active JIT complex, do the permissions transfer to the new owner, or do we have to apply ourselves? JITs are still a very popular purchase for British people buying and moving to France, aren't they? So what do people need to know if they're looking to buy a JIT or a JIT complex?
Well, yeah, they're extremely popular. There's like 92 million tourists visit France every year, and JITs is one of the great things that families can stay in. And I know from a lot of friends who've got JIT businesses, the same people visit every year if it's as if it's their own holiday home. So if they're run well, they can be extremely successful and be booked up, you know, in years, you know, continually in advance. With regards to permissions, things like, for example, if there was a CU, which is a change of use for a barn, and you know it was still valid, the seller would have to agree to have it transferred into the new owner's names. Things like if it's got a JIT de France logo on it, that wouldn't automatically get transferred. You would have to have another inspection by the JIT de France to sign you off, so to speak. So there's lots of things that you would have to reapply for. They're not costly things that's going to cost anything, but obviously no two people are going to, or two families are going to run the JIT in the same way. So a lot of the things like, you know, registering with the mairie, registering for tax obviously doesn't transfer. You'd have to register for tax yourself. I know Tracy would be able to help with a lot of this paperwork sort of thing that would need to be done. But it's, you know, people sell JITs all the time. The good thing that you are getting when you buy a JIT business is the property, usually everything, the beds, the linen, you know, we make a full itinerary of inventory, should I say, of what's in the JIT, and that's part of what you're paying for. And you're also paying for the name and the goodwill, you know, of the clients, and any bookings that are coming in, they would automatically transfer over to you. But there will be certain things that you're going to have to register for in your own name, particularly the tax, you know, for your income from the JIT business, and any permits, or if you want to, you know, register with the tourist office and things like that, you would have to do that again. But it's not difficult. Tracy's there to help, we're there to help. So, you know, and we sell loads of JITs. We've been in business for 25 years and we've sold an awful lot of JIT businesses. So usually when people retire, because nobody sells it because they don't like doing it, because it's a great way to socialise and have a really lovely life in France. It's all about the lifestyle.
That's great. Yeah, I'm ready to sign up now. Let me show me some JITs. Okie dokie. Let's move on to a question for Tracy. Complete change of subject. Robert Gayser, I'm sorry if I've apologized that incorrectly, Robert, in the USA or Canada, says, can someone over 80 years old get a French driver's license? So how does it work applying for French driving licenses, Tracy? Oh, I think you're still on mute, I think.
Sorry, I was on mute. So Robert, yes, good question for driving licenses. So Yes, the quick answer is if you're 80 or over, you can get a driving license in France. So they don't impose an age limit for driving license in France, unlike other countries. And there's no renewable medical test to get your driving license either. So that's the first thing. Obviously, getting an exchange in place for an American or a Canadian will largely depend, first of all, on the reciprocal agreement. So if you're from America, there's a, all the different states, there is an actual list of states where the reciprocal agreement is in place, and the same for Canada as well. So if you're part of one of the states that has that agreement in place, then you would exchange your driving license within the first year of living in France. And that is important, because the reciprocal agreement that is in place for those states is there for that first year. So if you get to the renewal stage of your residency or your visa, you come in on a 1-year visa. If you get to the renewal stage and you haven't applied for your exchange, then of course you would have to take a driving test. So the good thing is, so whatever age you are at, you can apply for this exchange within that first year if you have the reciprocal agreement in place. Obviously, if you have any medical issues, then that's something that could be asked for if that's on your records, but generally speaking, they don't. So how does it work? Let me spend a minute with you to explain a little bit about how it works. It's an online process via the ANTS, the ANTS website, as it's called in France. It's an online process whereby you have to, of course, have all your, your either a fiscal or a social security number to be able to do the application, because it's an online process where you have to be in the system, because normally it's for residents, of course. You would have to have things like passport, obviously valid passport, your residency permit or your visa, proof of address in France, of course, so that's the base documents that you would need to have. You'd have to have your original driving license, so front and back copy, which will have to be translated. You'd also need to have what they call, I don't know if you call it I call it an entitlement document, but it could be a certificate of authenticity, or basically a document proving that you have a valid driving record from the country or the state where it was issued. So, and that would have to be translated as well. So it has to basically say that you have a valid driving license, there's no suspensions on it. Photos, of course, and of course, depending on the issue date of your driving license, they can go back looking at when it was issued and the validity of that. So it's a bit of a process that takes about 6 to 8 months. I know that might shock a lot of people, but there is quite a big backlog on the ANTS website for driving license exchanges. So it's very important to do that within your first year, I would say at month 6 of living in France, so that you can prove it's been done in the right deadline in case you get past that 1-year phase. And for those of you that are living in France and want to do that, like the Brexit, the British passport holders, the rule of thumb is to make sure you do that at least 6 months before expiry, because of the time frames it takes. So hopefully I haven't taken too long on that question. I hope that's answered it for you, Robert, but if not, do reach out.
Thanks, Tracy. And in the meantime, people can continue driving on their driving licenses from their home countries, but they need to get that process started.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to a question for Amanda now. My partner and I want to buy a property in France. We're not married, and I've heard that could be a problem for the future if one of us dies and leaves the property to the other partner. In that situation, how would the tax work?
Okay, so first things first, you need to do a will. So when you are going through your Leggett agent, and they will talk to you about a notaire and what their role is, it's really important to have a will. So even if you are not married, you don't have a civil partnership, if it's in your will that you want that half of that property to go to this person, your partner, then you can do that. However, and it's a big however, what you need to do is you need to be aware that in France, it is the beneficiary that pays the tax and the inheritance tax. Whereas, for example, in the UK, it's the estate that pays the tax, inheritance tax. So because you are not legally married or legal partnership, a civil partnership, then you're going to be taxed at a really high rate, and currently it's about 60%. But when you speak to the notaire, it would be really good to ask them for some advice, because it might be that you decide to do a civil partnership, which is called a pax in France. And he or they, your notaire, will be able to explain what's the best way to set things up. And they can also talk to you about inheritance tax planning and which is the best way to buy the property. Obviously, Joanna and her team have got lots of experience. So together with your Leggett agent and your notaire, you can buy your property the correct way, and then make sure that everything is in place, so that, I was going to say if you die, but let's face it, we all die sometime, don't we? That when you die, there is less upset for the person and the people that are left behind. So it's just a little bit of housekeeping. Definitely need a will, and you need to speak to the notaire about the implications and what you can do to lower those inheritance taxes.
Absolutely, thanks, Amanda. 60% is a high bill to pay, and it might not be the sort of thing you want to think about before you buy a property, but as Amanda says, it's a bit of housekeeping that could save you a lot of money and upset in the future. So let's move on to a question for Paulette now. What kind of health policy do we need for our visa application? Is there a one-size-fits-all policy, or should they be tailored to fit? So that's health insurance, I presume.
Okay, so when you're applying for your visa, if you need a health insurance policy to accompany that, there are minimum requirements that are needed. So the minimum requirement for medical emergency and repatriation is 30,000 euros, which is a minimum. It's not a lot if you do need to be medically repatriated, but that's the minimum that's required. It must cover the whole length of the stay. Now, this is something that quite often we'll have clients say, oh, I've got an annual travel insurance. An annual travel insurance will not cover the whole length of a 12-month visa. It will be valid for 12 months, but for individual trips of usually no more than 30 days within that 12 months. So if you're going to be in France permanently for 12 months, an annual travel insurance won't cover it. So the visa health insurance is a specific insurance that makes sure it covers for 365 days of the 12-month visa. It also must cover the whole of the Schengen zone. Now, something to bear in mind also, which Tracy can help you with, is not everybody needs a health insurance policy to accompany their visa application. For example, if somebody's is able to get an S1 from the UK or another European country, that is the health insurance for the visa application. So you don't necessarily need the policy to accompany that visa application. However, in that case, I would very much recommend that when you do arrive in France, we can do a standalone policy just for the first few months when you arrive in France and you're waiting to get your French social security number. But it's a slightly different type of policy because it doesn't need to accompany the visa application, because that's what your S1 is going to do. And there's other circumstances which Tracy can take you through. Does one size fit all? Absolutely not. One size fits all to cover the minimum requirements. But then we're a broker. We deal with multiple different companies, and within different companies they've all got different types of policies, different levels as well. Some policies will cover various pre-existing conditions, some won't, some cover much higher levels, some you can pay monthly, some you've got to pay annually. It absolutely one size doesn't fit all, and what we do is we'll go through and find out what's important to you and what your budget is. Because, if you say to somebody what's important to you, they want everything covered, but then obviously there's a cost for that. So, it's important to get something that fits you and your circumstances, because your circumstances aren't the same as the person before that we've spoken to. Everybody's individual, everybody's situation is different, and everyone's budget is different. So it's got to be something that fits, it's tailor-made for you and fits your requirements.
Thanks, Paula. As you say, no two people are the same. Their health situations aren't the same, that what their requirements. So definitely it's, seek advice before you apply for that visa. So question for Sharon now. Can I buy a property half and half mortgage and cash? So half mortgage, half cash. And are there any benefits to doing so?
So if you're buying a property half mortgage, half cash, it basically means that your personal contribution, your down payment to the property is going to be 50%. So we're doing a 50% loan to value. It opens up more banks, and it doesn't necessarily get you a better interest rate, but there are a few more lenders that are happy to lend on a lower loan to value because it decreases their risk for the property. However, it's important for you to understand that in the future, if you decided you wanted to release your money from the property, it's not actually possible. In the UK, in the US, you do home equity line of credit or equity release, or you remortgage and you release some capital at the same time. That's not part of the French lending culture. Lending in France is very conservative and people pay their mortgage off over 15, 20, 25 years. And until the last 10 years or so, interest rates were actually quite stable, and remortgaging onto a lower rate wasn't general practice. And it's only when interest rates came down after the subprime crisis and we kind of hit really, really low rates that people started remortgaging to go onto lower rates. But you can't release equity. So if you have like 200,000 euros outstanding on your mortgage and you remortgage to another product, well, to another bank, then you're going to be remortgaging for 200,000, not if your property is worth 500,000. You can't say, well, I'll remortgage for 300,000. So you have to think very carefully. Interest rates at the moment are quite low. They're they're going up slightly, but they're not going up a lot. Maybe your money would be better invested. If you're moving to France, you can look with Amanda at how you can invest and get a higher yield and actually use the leverage of the mortgage rather than putting 50% of your cash into the property. Because once you put that cash in, the hardest thing for me as a mortgage broker is when people come to me, they've made the move and they realize, they want to buy another property. Maybe they want to buy another property in another part of France which they hadn't visited, etc., and keep the property that they love, which they bought initially. And then they realize that all of their cash is tied up in the property. When I say to them, well, we can't, you're going to have to sell the property to get the cash out. And unless they become a French fiscal resident with a proper French income and everything, if the income's from abroad, it doesn't work. Sometimes we can do a sort of equity release, but that's really for French fiscal residents, and it's very expensive as well. So my advice would actually be, depending on your situation and whether it's affordable, to use the leverage of a mortgage whilst the interest rates are low, and to speak to an investment advisor, speak to Amanda if it's in France, who will help you get a better yield generally and make your money work for you, because it's better to have that money if you need it than to have to sell your home.
That's great advice. Thanks, Sharon. Harry, a question for you now. Jo Gosling in the UK wants to know how she can protect her money when transferring a large sum for house deposit and purchase.
Okay, thanks, Jo. I'm completely on your side. I think if it was me, this is what I'd be most concerned with. When you're transferring these large amounts, it can be quite daunting. So how to make sure it's protected, how could you go about this? I would say the most important thing is to understand how the entities that are going to be handling your money are regulated, and what measures they've put in place just to ensure maximum security. Typically, if your money is held in a bank in the UK, your funds are going to be protected by the FSCS, which is the Financial Service Compensation Scheme, which in the event of the bank failing, you'd be covered up to £85,000. But with lots of these big banks, it would take quite a bit of bad news for them to actually go out of business. So people do feel comfortable holding their funds in these banks for short periods whilst they're getting everything sorted. For the newer online banks, or the neobanks as we call them, it's a little bit more dangerous. They're younger, you know, it takes less movement for them to actually go under. So I would think twice about holding large sums in those neobanks. But as far as financial services companies like us, because we're not a bank, we're completely different. We're regulated by the FCA, and we hold what's called an e-money license. So what we can do is we can hold funds for you in segregated accounts that are safeguarded. And what this actually means is that the funds are protected up to 100% in the event that something happened to Lumon. Companies like us don't all hold this degree of licensing, and we've decided to opt for this route because it allows us to give you peace of mind whilst we're handling your money. But it also allows us to hold the money on client accounts when we've got the e-money institution level. This is good because once you've lodged the money with Lumon, you can decide when you want to actually book in the exchange. If we were regulated to a lesser level, then you would have to just go straight in and straight back out, regardless of where the market was, which I don't think sounds very appealing, but yeah. So to sum up, basically, make sure you do some research on the company that you're looking at using and how they're regulated, and speak to the people as well. Make sure that they can explain how they're protecting, how they're handling your money whilst it's all going through.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks for explaining that. We've got another 15 minutes left in the webinar. Let's see if we can whiz through some more of these questions and get a question for every panelist before we finish. So let's start with Joanna again. Charlotte Brown in the UK says, is there an equivalent to Rightmove in France where you can view properties on a map? And I guess that's the same in the USA, for example. They have multi-listing sites too.
Yes, I mean, obviously we advertise on a lot of different portals, and one of them being, all of the French ones are all in French, obviously. But our own website is, we hold every single property that we have on our books on our old website, on our own website. We don't necessarily put them all onto the portals. So it's always a good thing to look at the portals, but if you really want that information or you want to see more properties that we hold, is to come to our own website. However, the ones that do location is a site called Bianic. That's where you can actually see the price and you can see the location on a map. The Bon Coin and Se Loger, which are the other big portals, don't do that. So they would just be like Rightmove. Well, I don't even know if Rightmove does now, but it doesn't show the actual location. On our website, we tell you where it is and we can show you on a sort of map. And then if you inquire on the property, we can send you the information. We might have drone videos, we might have Google map locations, etc., which isn't really that common in France. But I do know that Bianic, and I think there's one other new one that's just come out, which I've forgotten the name of, but they do show the actual location, you know, on a street map as such. But most of the big ones don't, and I'd always advise, because some agencies only use portals because they're not very strong on websites, or they might be a small French company. Our website's been going for 25 years, so it's full of content as well as all of the areas covered. So I would always suggest that, you know, find your agent on the portal, but do go back to the agency, because portal advertising is so expensive now that not all agencies put all of their properties on there. Even like with Rightmove, all of our properties aren't on Rightmove. A lot of them are, but not all of them. So it's always good to find your agent and then go back to your agent's website, because there'll be a bigger selection on there. But I do know if you're looking for the area of Bianic.
Thanks, Joanna. That's great. Question for Tracy now. I'm married to a Frenchman and we are going to move back to France from the UK. Does this move mean I can move without a visa, and what is the process?
Yeah, excellent question. So not one that I can answer quickly, but I'll just spend a couple of minutes on it. So if you're married to a Frenchman living in the UK, you want to move to France, the answer would be yes. You could say yes to that answer. You can move without a visa. However, I'm going to put a really big red flag here, because obviously I've done this for 15 years and I've seen every single scenario. So it's not because you're married to a French man that there is no process to go through. And in fact, you will find that married to a French person doesn't necessarily make it easier. It's the opposite side. Legally, you have the right, when you're married to a French person, to have the V family visa. However, they do look at it very carefully. And the very first thing I would say is, where did you get married? So if you was married in the UK, then you have to register that in France before you can come to France. So if you've got a friend married to a French person, but it's not registered in France, then you can't come to France without a visa. You would have to apply for a visa from the UK. If you are married and it has been registered in France, then you could come without a visa and apply directly from France for a married to a French visa, which is a V famille. However, from a practical perspective, and I always come from a practical perspective, how long does it take and what is the process like? If you come to France married to a French person without a visa from the UK, it will take longer, because you're coming on a visa, and then once you get to the renewal price, you will then apply for the attaching to your French family member. Sorry, when you get the visa, you can apply to the French family member, and that, if you like, will take 6 months. If you come into France without a visa, you will go through the French prefecture, and depending which prefecture you are working with, they can sit on your file for a very long period of time, and they will ask for lots of documents. So it really depends on whether your marriage has been registered in France. And if you don't, you're not worried too much about how long it takes, because my advice is always to get the visa first to come in. That gives you the opportunity to spend the time in France on a 1-year visa. You have the time then to work on getting the residency card from your local prefecture. But if you come to France without that visa, straight away, you have to work on getting the residency card from your local prefecture. You have to send off proof. One of the major things you have to show is proof of living together. So obviously, if you've just moved to France, you've got no proof of living together, so you have to show the UK living together as husband and wife. And they want to see a minimum of 6 months of communal living together. You have to sign a document to say that that you're only married to each other, you're not married to other people, and they do check on those documents. So it's quite a big process. I apologize that the answer is a little bit all over the place, because I'm conscious of the time. So my advice would be, check on the marriage certificate where you was married. If you want to come without the visa, come, but just prepared for a 6 to 8 month process in France.
Thanks, Tracy. So not as simple as it may seem at first.
No.
So question for Amanda now. We have various stocks and shares and investments in the UK and have been happy with the performance. When we move to France, would it be okay to leave it as it is, or should we restructure?
Okay, so this will depend on everybody's personal circumstances. So what you had in the UK worked for the UK, and the rules and tax efficiency there. When you move to France, France has its own rules, and in an ideal situation, you would look at restructuring it and wrapping it in a tax efficient wrapper, so you're not going to have to pay capital gains tax, on some cases income taxes, social charges. So if you like paying taxes, keep it where it is, but if you want to pay less taxes, then speak to a specialist, and we can make sure that that things are suitable for you while you're here. That's the short answer.
That seems very good advice. If you like or don't like paying taxes, follow Amanda's advice. Right, yeah. One for Paulette now. Do we need special holiday home insurance for our second home in France, or is it the same as for a permanent home?
It's quite an easy one to answer. It's the same policy, except you need to make sure that your insurer is aware that you're not always at the property. The kind of golden rule is 90 days per year, and that's not consecutive. That's it during the year. Because a lot of, we do have clients saying, no, I'm always there for, a few weeks. It's 90 days during the year, cumulative. Some policies have like a clause that if you're away from the property for a certain amount of time, you've got to have the shutters closed. Other ones, quite a common one is over winter, say from November to April. You need to drain the water systems. So you need to just check that you know what the details of the policy are. One thing I would say though is if it's a holiday home, I would very much recommend either leaving a key with a hand holder or getting to know your neighbours or somebody in the village. Because if there's a storm, say for example, half of your roof's been ripped off, I mean, that's quite a dramatic storm, but just, you know, as an example, and then there's water pouring in through the house. We definitely had it during COVID where people would come to the property 6 months later and go, oh, hang on a minute, there must have been a storm about 4 months ago. Things like that have got to be declared within a set amount of time. You can't kind of, I mean, during COVID, it was quite relaxed, but, you know, you can't kind of come say, I think there was a storm a year ago. You know, there's got to be a declaration by the local town hall that declares it as a climatic event and things like that. So you do kind of need to just keep an eye out on local weather conditions and have a friendly face who can, even if they haven't got a key to the property, can kind of go and drive past your property and give you a report back, you know, if you've lost half a roof or not, or a tree's fallen on the property or something like that. So just be aware. But generally it's the same, you're covered for the same things. You just need to make sure your insurer is aware that you're not always at that property.
Thanks, Paulette, and that's very pertinent advice at the moment, because a lot of France, certainly in the north, is very windy today, not lovely French weather. Let's move on. Quick question for Sharon now. I'm 65 years old. Can I apply for a French mortgage? So are there age limits? Can they apply?
They can, although technically it's quite difficult in the current market. The majority of lenders have a maximum age for the end of term, which is 75. At 65, the lenders will be looking at, are you retired, or when you will retire. But as you reach your legal retirement date, as based in France or the country where you live during the lifetime of the mortgage, they will base your lending ability on your future retirement income. If you're already retired, that's very simple because we can use the income that you're already getting. It's more complicated if you're going to retire in the next couple of years. Because the maximum age limit is 75, it means obviously you're going to be restricted to a 10-year mortgage, which means your monthly payments are going to be higher and therefore your borrowing capacity lower than if you were going to be able to have a 20-year mortgage. Having the shorter term also puts you in a position where at the moment we're finding people have issues with something called the usury rate. It's very technical, it's very French, but it's basically the maximum an APRC can be, which is set by the Banque de France, and lenders cannot legally go above that. As you get older, life insurance costs more. When your mortgage is smaller, it's on a shorter duration, the ancillary costs such as the legal charge, the lender's arrangement fees, the life insurance, etc., all of those are included in the APRC, so they represent a greater percentage. And the reality is, in the current market, where we're seeing, since war and global events, we're seeing interest rates creeping up, we're finding that people are having more issues with the usury rate. For slightly older customers. So at 65, your life insurance, that's a fact, it's going to cost more and it's going to be more difficult. It's something we do look at on a case-by-case basis. So it's not a blanket no for everybody. So it can be done. We do it, but it's not as simple.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sharon. And a final question for Harry. How can we ensure we get the best exchange rate when we buy our property in France? So that might be a bit of a crystal ball question, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. I'm conscious of time. We get this question all the time actually from clients, and I would answer, well, what do you mean best exchange rate? Is that over the last week or is it over the last 5 years? Because they're going to look like two different numbers. I think what's important is to know how you can get the most out of your transfer, and because as you said, it's impossible to know how the markets are going to be chopping and changing in the future. So to get the most out of your transfer, I would say there's two things. The first one is stay informed. Events in the world are affecting the rates. We collate data from 50 banks and financial institutions to give us some kind of an idea about what the forecast looks like for any given currency pair, we can speak to you on the phone, translate this news into numbers, and just give you the facts about what could happen. And the second thing is explore all the different options. You don't just need to do the exchange rate on a spot contract on the day, which is an instant transfer. I mean, over the past 3 months, we've seen sterling euro vary by about 2%. If you're buying a property for 300,000, that would equate to 6,000 euros. If that number is turning into something which is quite big and there's a risk that you can't afford that property, then we've got an option for that. If you want to target a specific rate, we can do that as well. It's just important to be speaking to the right people and getting the right information to make an informed decision, basically.
Lovely. Thanks very much for that, Harry. So we've certainly covered a lot of topics, a lot of information over this last hour. I wouldn't be surprised if your brains out there are boggling. The good news is you'll receive an email after this webinar, which will include a recording of the webinar, so you can go back and listen to anything you missed or anything you want to listen to again. You'll also receive information in there about how to register for the next webinar, which is on the 17th of June. Sorry if we didn't get round to your question, but all our panelists are very happy to answer any questions you have. All their contact details are on the screen, so please don't hesitate to get in touch with them. So before we leave the webinar, I'd just like to hand over to the panelists to say their farewells. So Joanna?
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. Just to let you know, if any of you are in the UK next weekend, well, this weekend coming actually, Saturday and Sunday, at the National Conference Centre in Birmingham is the France show, and I think all of us are going to be there, so you can come and talk to us personally, but if you can't, obviously you can drop us an email at any time. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanna. And Tracy?
Yes, thanks for all your wonderful questions this evening. It's been great answering them. If there's anything that is bothering you, reach out to us. It's our job to really help you with that smooth transition to France, and it starts with getting the right answers to those questions. And yes, I will be there at the France show with Joanna and Karen and Paulette and Mint, and Amanda's going to be there as well. So we're going to be there answering your questions. So look forward to see you this weekend if you can make it to Birmingham. If not, we'll be here on the 17th of June to answer more questions.
Thanks, Tracy. And Sharon?
Thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful again, as always, listening to all of the answers. I think it shows everybody's areas of expertise and how complex everything can be, but with the right assistance, you can get to where you need to be. So with regards to French mortgages, it's definitely a whole different kettle of fish than in other countries. So do feel free to reach out. My email's at the bottom of the screen. I won't be in Birmingham next week. I wish I was, but unfortunately I can't be. But I'm sure it'll be a great show, and I hope everybody has a wonderful time.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. I hope I managed to get a little bit of information about health insurance. It's such a huge topic, almost impossible to answer in kind of two answers to two questions. So don't hesitate to reach out. It's, I say, it's such a massive topic. We will be at the French Property Exhibition this Saturday and Sunday. So if you're in the area, yes, we'd love to see you. But if not, get in touch.
Thanks, Paulette. And Amanda?
Thank you for tuning in. You've got all of these wonderful, wonderful, knowledgeable people. Reach out to them. That's what we're here for. And no question is a silly question or, oh, I shouldn't really answer that. Just ask, because that's what we're all here for. And see you on the 17th, if not in Birmingham.
And Harry?
Thank you very much for hosting, Karen. Thanks to all the panelists. Yeah, as everyone said, some really interesting information. I will also be there at Birmingham on the Saturday for the show, so please come and have a quick chat if you've got any questions. But yeah, don't feel free to get in touch with me. I can, after a very simple and free registration, put you through to some of our senior traders who will be in a good position to make sure you're comfortable and know what's happening with your buying process.
Thanks, Harry. And I shall be at the French Property Exhibition. That's at the National Conference Centre in Birmingham. I'll be there with French Property News magazine and our various other magazines. Please do come along and say hello to us. It'd be lovely to see some of your faces. We see a lot of the same names appear on our webinar registrations. It would be really lovely to meet some of you, and all these excellent panelists will be able to answer your questions. So we'll see you in Birmingham maybe, or we'll see you on the 17th. So until then, thank you for joining us, and bye.
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 Bye.